Hey guys, Matt Allen here. Welcome back to Tactical Bassin. Today I want to talk to you about how to catch the biggest bass of your life during the fall to winter transition. How do you go out right now and catch that true giant bass that you've been looking for? Now, it would be one thing to just pick up a handful of baits, walk you through the baits that we like to throw this time of year, show you some of the tips, the tricks that we do with those baits. We do a lot of those videos. When we're done with those, we typically take you out on the water, demonstrate the techniques, catch fish, to show you start to finish how it's done. But today I want to do something a little different. Sure, we're going to do a little bit of this, but something came up. If you guys watched Monday's video, you saw that last week I traveled with our buddy Coop. He came out from Arkansas. We drove around a few states. We fished some lakes. We had a blast. But in our discussions, something came up. We were talking about time of day, switching between different techniques, and I realized it might be something we've missed. So we are going to talk baits. We're going to talk gear. I also want to get into time of day. This is critical information. I want you to pay attention. I'm going to try and make this really quick. Time of day to catch your biggest bass will completely vary depending on what your bass are eating. So on one lake, whew, that sounds bright. On one lake, you might show up and your best opportunity is the first 15 minutes of daylight. Another lake, it seems like you get all your big bass right in the middle of the day. So that has nothing to do with the actual lake. So I want to make this clear. It has everything to do with what the bass are eating. So you can have all the best baits, you can be completely dialed in, but you can be doing it at the wrong time. So let me give you the cliff notes, okay? Here's the cliff notes. If your bass are eating up on the bank, meaning you're throwing a jerkbait, throwing a square bill, throwing a deep crank, throwing a jig, throwing anything, a glide bait right up on shore around cover. This time of year, your best bet for success is going to be early and late, lower light, or midday. If it's slick calm, you'll be in trouble. But if the wind comes up and starts to blow, you're in good shape. However, if your fish are eating in open water, they're out on the ends of long tapering points, they're suspended fish, you've got fish eating a spoon in 40 or 50 feet of water on bait balls. If your fish are out in the open, middle of day is critical. Okay, so the same lake, you might get up on the bank in the morning and catch fish eating shad in 2 feet of water with the top water, and then that bite goes away. Same exact lake, you can go out 30, 40, 50, 60 feet of water, find bass eating shad again, but now they're doing it out in the open, and prime time is going to be 11, noon, 1, 2, 3, the high sun part of the day. Okay, so it comes down to two things: whether or not they're eating in the open and what they're eating. So generalizations: if bass are targeting trout or kokanee, your swim bait fish. Middle of day. This time of year, 11 to 3 is the prime window. Now you can fudge it a little bit, but 11 to 3, when the sun is the highest, if the bass are sitting out on the ends of points, if they're suspended, anywhere where they're looking up for a trout or a kokanee to get between them and the surface where they can see it, they can come in and hunt it. You're throwing a glide bait, those fish come up and track. Anything like that where those fish need to spot that bait from a distance, they will hunt the most. The biggest ones will hunt in the middle of the day. The fish that you are after, the actual fish of a lifetime, will not be a low light feeder, because in the middle of the day they can see the farthest. They can sit lower than their forage, they can sit lower than the trout, and they can look for them. And if they're down low, the trout are up high, they'll be silhouetted and they can spot them from a distance. They have the advantage. Now you as the angler have a complete disadvantage that time of day because it's the most likely time of day for you to get busted by the fish. For them to see you, to see your line, to see your hooks hanging from your bait, any number of things to tell them that it's not the right time to take a shot at that trout. But it's also the only time that that fish is up there being active and aggressive. Now, what do you do the rest of the time? That is the question. Now let's talk about the others and then we'll circle back. We'll answer that same question all at once. So your shad eaters, shallow fish, bank fish, you're catching them early, then it shuts off. What do you do? And what is the difference? Why do those fish eat early? Well, that's simple. Those fish are up against the bank. So the light, they're sitting against cover and they're immediately ambushing prey. For them, light is a disadvantage. The more lit up it is, the more the bait fish see the predator, not the other way around. So if the fish are in the open and they hunt up, light is to their advantage. They can silhouette. If the predator is on the shore, they're up against cover, they're using shadow to their advantage, so they will hunt low light. So what do you do during the non-optimal times? Because that's the rest of your day, right? Well, there are some interesting things. So the trout eaters, shad eaters, trout eaters, kokanee eaters, those open water fish, okay? You can still trigger those fish, but typically not with a swim bait. That's why you'll see a lot of times I start my day with the crank this time of year. You'll notice typically that first good fish I catch in the morning is a crankbait fish. That's because I'm trying, even though it's not an optimal time of day, that fish is still sitting at a depth where I can reach them. I can get a bait in front of them. So I try to crank them. I try to get a pure core feed response out of the fish. Has nothing to do with them being sitting there ready to eat. They're just sitting there waiting for prime time. But here comes that crankbait, full speed, pauses, full speed, pauses. They just lash out and eat it. So if you watched Monday's video, you notice every day of that trip on different lakes, on different species, my first key fish came on that crankbait. Now, if you can't get them to react, say you've got bad weather conditions, okay, it's post-frontal, it's shut down, whatever it might be, something has got those fish turned off. Trout and kokanee eaters, when they're sucked down to the bottom and they're in a non-responsive mood, still, once in a while, you're not playing the odds here, but they will still, on occasion, eat the jig. And that's why you notice, again, this time of year, I've always got that jig on deck. Now, if you watch a lot of our actual on-the-water videos where Tim and I are out fishing, you don't see us catching that many jig fish on every trip. But that jig is always present. That's why. Because it's a bait we turn to. And again, it's still a big fish bait. If you want to catch the biggest fish this time of year, you have to fish big fish baits. Those baits typically fall into two categories. You've got, well, they all fall into two categories. You've got baits that are going to fool the bass. That would be a jig, slow fished, looking like a crawdad on bottom, or the big swim bait, slow fished, looking like a trout or a shad or whatever else you're imitating along the bottom. Those baits, slow moving. The fish have time to come in, analyze them, and then they choose to eat that bait. It looks right, smells right, whatever it might be, they decide to take the shot. You fooled that fish into biting. Other end of the spectrum, you have some of our favorite baits. Smaller glide baits, cover glides, speed cranking, jerk baits, hopping a blade bait or an LV along the bottom. There are a handful of true reaction baits, the A-rig, baits that draw a core reaction response, a feed response out of a bass, whether or not it wants to bite. Those are the two styles of bait that will catch those big fish. But you could do it with baits that will tend to get smaller bites. So what I mean is, if I want to fool a bass, sure, I could go out and I could throw a Ned rig, I could throw a drop shot, I could do a lot of things that will catch me fish. But if I take the time and do it with a jig instead, I might get less bites, but I will get the key bites. If I'm fishing a Ned rig going down the bank and I catch a fish there, I catch one there, I catch one there, I catch one there, and I come across a 12-pounder, she may or may not eat that Ned rig. But if I come along and I catch one there, and then I get nothing, I get nothing, I get nothing, you don't get as many bites on the jig. But I come across that same giant bass, the odds of her eating a jig are exponentially higher than her eating that little tiny soft plastic. So again, we're playing the odds. So trout and kokanee eaters, prime time, swim bait them. No way around it. You're either throwing a big soft bait or a big glide bait. Those are the two ways you're gonna get them this time of year consistently. Not prime time. Speed crank them. Try to get that core reaction, that true feed response out of that bass. If conditions just aren't conducive, you just know these fish are in such a bad mood. Nothing's moving, nothing's feeding. You got to the lake, there's not a ripple on the surface, there's no bait fish, there's nothing busting. Drop to bottom, fish that jig, fish it slow, fish it in the same places that you get your swim bait bites. You're looking for the exact same fish. Don't suddenly change it up. If you've got swim bait fish or you've had fish follow out on some long tapering main lake point, out on a pinch point somewhere, and you decide you're gonna throw a jig, well, don't go to the back of a cove. Go to the exact same place. Those big trout eaters, they don't move around a whole lot. They're territorial. They're dominant fish. They hold their ground. They are there. Whether or not you get them on that jig, whether or not you get them on that crankbait, they are there. Now, other end of the spectrum, shad eaters, bluegill eaters, all those fish that are right up against the bank. You want to fish aggressively for them when it's prime time, okay? Focus on those baits that draw reactions. Speed crank them. If it's a little deeper, do it with a deep crank. If it's a little shallower, do it with a square bill. Throw the jerk bait for them. You're trying to elicit that same core response. The reason, again, is that it's easier to trigger a big bass than to fool a big bass. I mean, the big ones are just hard to fool. There's no way around it. But if you can trigger them, the rest doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that they don't want to eat. It doesn't matter that they know it's fake. They just respond. So you can get around all those years that fish has grown up and seen lures and been in a live well, got dragged to a weigh-in. All that goes out the window when that thing stops right there and takes off again. They just plain feed. They just react. So focus on those reaction baits. Now, when it's not prime time for that, there's really no good news. That is when you just slow down and fish. Those tough days where those shallow fish are just shut down. If you've only got shad eaters, bluegill eaters, crappie eaters, little bait fish eaters up in the shallows, not out in open water, and you've got brutal conditions, that's a brutal time. Still try, if you can, to focus on reaction, but if it's truly not there, those days happen. Keep going, keep going. You're looking for that one bite. It can still happen on any day, but you just want to stick to your guns because it might be a one-off that decides to feed on the wrong day, or you might come back the next day, catch them where they're going and catch a big one, and then go to the next spot, get another big one, next spot, another big one. Those days happen this time of year. So that was a lot of information quick. Just to recap, 2 styles of bait that you're going to focus on this time of year if you want a big one. You've got your reaction baits, and I'll link the exact ones in the video description. The key baits that we trust this time of year to draw that core reaction from a bigger than average fish. And then you've got the baits that are going to fool those fish, which namely are a jig and a swim bait. And I'll give you those exact baits. I'll give you different baits if you're imitating trout or kokanee or gizzard shad. We'll give you some different baits that we have a lot of confidence in. But stick to those key baits, even when it's not working. This is the time of year where if you put the time in, you can get that giant, giant bite. Focus on the right time of day. Don't go out there first thing in the morning throwing a great big swim bait, and then when it doesn't work, go drop shotting. You just started drop shotting during prime time. You've missed your window. So focus on fishing at the right time of day with the key baits. And if you stick to your guns, the odds of you getting the biggest bass of your life go sky high this time of year. Guys, if you enjoyed the video, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, share it with your friends. Tim and I appreciate you, and we'll talk to you soon.